Hi there, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mark Constable. I'll be your host and moderator for the session, and it's a pleasure to be joined by the brilliant Melanie Franklin. Melanie's a consultant, coach, trainer, mentor, all-round guru on all things agile and change management. So you're in great hands for the session, and the focus of today's session is really all about combining the best from both worlds, really. So agile techniques with change management best practice and how that can really help us to optimize change delivery, which is everyone's goal that's involved in change. So before we get started, a few bits of housekeeping just to quickly reel off. So just 3 points. First is to confirm that we're recording the session. You probably just heard the announcement. So this will be available on demand for future reference. And if you want to share it with colleagues and friends and whoever, really. Secondly, submit questions at any time. Melanie loves the interaction. Melanie loves to help you out with challenges that you're having. So do get those questions in at any point. We'll both be keeping an eye on those as we go. We'll always leave a bit of time towards the end of the session to address as many as we can. And last but not least, we welcome your feedback. So that helps me and helps the rest of the team at APMG planning and delivering these sessions in the future. So whatever feedback you have, positive, negative, or indifferent, please share that with me because it's all very useful. So that is everything from me for now. So without further ado, Melanie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's just get started, I think, on the first bit with what is Agile Change. The whole point of Agile Change is that we are trying to bring in the principles from the Agile community and combine that with all of the models and theories we know from the change management profession. So it's bringing the two worlds together. I put in the Agile Change handbook 5 key concepts around Agile. Because we know that a lot of the Agile methodologies have a lot of the principles of how you work in Agile. And I've tried to make that very businessy focused so that it's all about the value we deliver to making our organizations run better. And the change management piece is thinking about, well, how do we address the actual behavior change piece? So applying principles from the Agile community is all about really the tangible change. We're trying to use that project or product focus to say, well, we're creating a new platform, we're creating a new product range, a new service range, we're going to be putting in new processes, new policies, whatever the tangible thing is that we're doing. Ultimately, what we're looking for is, yeah, but how do we get that into use? I mean, how do we sort of help people move forward in terms of how they adopt new behaviours? I can see quite a few hands up. I can't hear anything. So, Mark, do you want to just quickly check that people can hear me and that everything's going okay? So
Yes.
I'll let you.
Yeah, I think it was fine. It's just that we have the hand raise function available. So perhaps when we get to questions, if people want to talk their question, then we can open up audio lines.
Okay. All right. So please put in the chat if you've got, and if you're raising your hands, if there's any kind of questions, we can see if there's a trend here, and I'll get on to that straight away. So the whole point of Agile Change, bringing together the worlds of both the tangible delivery, product or project, and behavior change. The whole point of that is that we're trying to create as much business value as early as possible. Yeah. The chat is disabled. That's what people are trying to say, Mark. So I will leave you with the technicalities of that.
Sure.
And what we're doing is we are bringing together these two worlds. It's kind of interesting that from a project perspective, project management, there's the Association of Change of Project Management, that was 1972. The Project Management Institute, I think, was 1968. From the Agile world, we have the original paper in the Harvard Business Review in 1986. But you could go all the way back to the 1940s and say that the lean methods being used, what was called the Toyota way, because it was Toyota that started all of that. You could argue there was an awful lot of lean, agile approaches within their lean approach. So you could go back to the 1940s. You could say that the Agile Business Consortium, who up to only a few years ago were called the DSDM Consortium, that stands for Dynamic Systems Development Model, but they put their model out in 1994. There was the way before the Agile Manifesto in 2001. So we know that there's quite a history to Agile, but it's bringing that out into a world where we can use it in a more business focused. I wouldn't say more commercial, because software development is very commercial, but applying it to these approaches to being able to actually shift the capability within an organization. And of course, we're bringing together that the change management world. My favorite textbook on change management is from 1972, but obviously change management goes back a lot longer than that. We use Rogers' innovation adoption model to help us understand early adopters. That's from the 1950s. A lot of the work that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did on the grief curve is the foundation of much of change management from the 1960s. And then we have Cotter and many others working in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So there's a history to all of this. But I wanted to turn it into something really useful. And my own origin story was that I was using a lot of the Agile PM from the Agile Business Consortium, and I've obviously been training in change management and the change management practitioner now for over about 20 years now. And what I found, I got to about 2012 and realized that actually there was a gap. The problem is that in Agile methods, whether that's the Agile Business Consortium or in fact it's Scaled Agile Framework, Large Scale Scrum, all of those methods were talking about, right, this is how we work in sprints, this is how we create things. We deliver on time. We're very open in terms of our requirements. We are experimenting. We've got a feedback loop. All talking about how we create change, but nothing to do with how we implement or adopt it. For example, Agile PM talks about the importance of deployment, but it doesn't then say exactly how to do that deployment. Of course it can't. It can't go off into an entire behavioural change training course. So you look at things like the change management practitioner, and you can go off down that route and you can learn all there is to know about change management. But actually, I thought, do you know what? I think we can package these together. So I wrote the Agile Change Handbook because I wanted to explore a way in which I could realize business change much earlier in the cycle. How could I get people actually practicing, adopting, creating new habits off the back of a drip feed of tangible change? That's really what inspired me. And from that, the Agile Change Agent qualification was born. And when I wrote the second edition of the Agile Change Handbook in 2019, 2020, from that, we put the Agile Change Coach together, because what I wrote is additional content. When you do a second edition, you have to write another 30% of your book. And so that 30% I dedicated to, well, okay, let's get into the specific techniques that help us nudge people to adopt a new way of doing something and forgetting an old way of doing something, because that's really at the heart of change. My background means that I was bringing in things like positive psychology, behavioral economics, emotional intelligence, neuroscience. So it's not really a surprise that in the last 18 months or so, APMG and I have launched the new Neuroscience for Change certification as well. So Agile Change is a flavor of how you do change. Another flavor might be looking at it from a more neuroscientific point of view, or on the left-hand side, they're looking at it from a more agile point of view. But we're bringing it all together in the Agile Change qualifications. And they are designed, these are all designed to be complementary. We're not saying that there's a development path where you must do one qualification after another, because actually that flies in the face of being agile, doesn't it? It's about picking up and running with a subject that really you are passionate about and you're finding really useful, and then from there moving on to the next thing that you think would be useful. So I've tried to give you a discovery path that is very agile. I want to be an authentic leader. I thought you might like to see the design criteria behind Agile Change, because it gives you an understanding of therefore what the content is. And what I predicted 12 years ago was that Agile Change would become a strategic priority. More on that in just a moment. But certainly I was aware that Agile was moving out of just IT software development and being picked up and being used by other parts of organizations. So about 50% of research and development projects are run using Agile. Just under a third of operations initiatives where we're doing continuous improvement, very much using Agile approaches. Customer service, sales and marketing are all using an Agile approach. Certainly this year has been dominated for me by CRM projects actually across my client base. Last year it was new target operating models, both of those being run along very agile lines by people who have nothing to do with IT development and everything to do with how their business is run. So I see agile change as something that's absolutely moved out into something that's very commercial, very useful. The other thing that I thought about when I was designing this was, and that's been sharpened up by McKinsey in the last couple of years, is that I was designing it for a modern leadership approach, facilitative, coaching style leadership, leadership where we are helping people to collaborate, to be the best that they can be. It's very interesting that in the last couple of years, the annual McKinsey global report about the future of work has talked about, in fact, last year they labeled it the year of the manager. And they talked about how managers are playing an increasingly important role in delivering change to their organizations. In fact, they actually went as far as labeling sort of people managers or line managers as change agents, because they're saying they guide their teams through change. They provide support. They ensure that everyone has the necessary skills to succeed. So they are all about being that change agent. And it goes to the heart of what's happening in every organization. And I was on the phone with an HR director yesterday about her engineering firm, which was, we are talking about managers, the people managers, having a foot in both camps. True 21st century leadership is that you have both the responsibility to perform, in other words, to get the day job done, but at the same time, you've also got to have that responsibility for transform. So putting change into operational use effectively. So people are doing a run the business and change the business kind of job. And she and I were talking about how that's being reflected back into their role descriptions. But certainly agile change goes to the heart of that. It is designed for, being brain smart. It's there to make sure that we are delivering an environment that engages people. So I've actually mapped the agile change course content back to the Gallup employee engagement criteria, which has come out. They've got 12 factors, and I'm delighted to see those factors being reflected back in the agile change content. Gallup have so far surveyed 30,000 people to help them develop those employee engagement criteria, and they'll continue with that work. And I keep an eye on that, as well as sort of mapping agile change to other more traditional sort of like the ACMP, the Association of Change Management Professionals, their standard. So making sure that actually that's on the path to their own CCMP qualification. So people can take these courses and get credits towards their CCMP qualification, but also the Change Management Institute body of knowledge. So I've mapped it across a whole range of different competency models and standards. I was broadening things out away from just IT development and very much to all types of change, all sizes, all types, whether it's cultural change, behavioural change, attitude change, or whether it's process change, efficiency gains, whatever. Really wanted to make this course far less academic, because the whole point of this is that we are trying to make sure that we do support leaders and managers. They don't want to be experts in agile. They don't want to be experts in change. They are marketing managers, finance managers, ops managers, customer service managers. They are trying to get their day job done. So they certainly don't want a big academic course. So it's all about making sure that the materials are practical, they're applicable to anybody, anyone can use them, and that they're actually fun to use, that these are solutions that make things so much simpler. And so, as I said before, you can pick and choose how you get started with Agile Change. And I'm going to give you some ideas about the content in a moment. So that will give you an idea of where do you want to go and how do you want to get started on your Agile Change journey. So a little bit more on the origin story, and thinking about where this comes from. I was reading, and I do every year, but I spent September reading up on all of the CEO surveys for 2024. Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, Gartner, Gallup, you name it. I've had a look. IBM had some stuff in there as well. So here's a few things that I think make Agile very relevant. And I do this every year to check on its relevance. 53% of CEOs are personally responsible for change. In other words, CEOs are now saying change is so strategically important to our organization that I'm going to take the lead on it. 43% of CEOs say that they are increasing their pace of change. I think that was the PwC survey, but actually, when I read the IBM survey, a different group of CEOs, they said it was 63% are saying that they're going to increase the pace of change. So the volume of change isn't getting any less. This was a study, I think this was a Deloitte one. It was in the Nordics, but it was borne out by other research around the world, about CEOs putting agility as a high priority. The importance of, and when you're in the boardroom, the word agility tends to be about flexibility and speed to market, but being able to respond to different circumstances. So agility, very popular. This was the PwC survey. We're talking about how organizations are really prioritizing change now, hiring transformation leaders and hiring transformation teams, allocating capital expenditure to transformation, or in fact raising additional funding for transformation. But I run the Global Capability for Change survey, which is just closed for the year. We're currently crunching the numbers, but last year, 38% of respondents said that they felt people had the time to adjust to change, to adopt new ways of working. So that's less than 4 in 10. And I think that number's soft. So we know that there is a big problem. There's the CEOs increasing the pace of change, but we know that people are so overwhelmed at work, so busy at work, that they're struggling to get a handle on all the changes that are happening. I think we're going to see how brain smart an agile approach is, because what you can do is have lots of short-term achievements. You can actually sort of set a step-by-step pathway to acquiring new skills, new abilities, new ways of working, so that people can continuously evolve rather than have to try to take on a massive change in their heads and try to make it work before sort of everything has to change all at once, because people just don't have the time for that level of focus and concentration. 43% of staff willing to support sort of enterprise-wide change might not sound too bad, but that was a Gartner figure that has dropped from 76% in only a few years. So again, that goes in line with, actually, we need ways to make change less painful. And I always try to include a relevant quote. And Katie Dowding, who's the CEO of Skanska, a major construction firm, she's on the UK arm. Her quote goes to the heart of what a lot of senior leaders are saying about agility is important to them. Why? Because they believe that survival, and there's a lot in the CEO surveys about, there's clearly a threat, a felt threat about survival of organizations. Not those organizations that sort of predict and are visionary, they predict the future, but those that are very flexible and can change and pivot according to circumstances. In other words, they can respond to new futures as they become available, rather than just sort of trying to say, well, this is where we're going, and go there. So I think flexibility, and you could look at that in any current circumstances. The UK has just gone through quite a brutal budget. The US are going through an election where businesses are just saying, we've got to wait for the results. We don't know which way the economy is going to go. We know in APAC there are a number of pressures at the moment. So there are so many factors that are affecting how we do business, that being agile makes a lot of sense. So now I'm going to get on to a little bit more on the specifics of what's actually in Agile Change. I'll check in with Mark now, though, before I do that, and just see if there's any comments, anything going on in the questions that I should be aware of.
I was about to say nothing at the moment, but one literally just put, don't know if you said it in chat. Do you have any observations on change fatigue?
Yes, I think that it is. I think it's not just change fatigue. I think it goes further. I think it's change overload. And I think that's an interesting word as well, because I think that fatigue implies that people are tired and it's their fault for being tired. I think when it's change overload, it implies that the firm is overloading them, the organization is overloading them. So it takes away that personal criticism, if you like. So I think that's quite important. And I know from all the work I'm doing across all sorts of organizations that I have never felt the need to break things into smaller pieces than I am right now. And I think there are two skills that I use all the time. First, and this is something that we call decomposition in the Agile Change course, that ability, that skill for taking a change that you need to make happen and break it into very small pieces. Because what we're looking at doing is, and I was going to talk about this anyway, but I'll put it up now, is we want that iterative plan. We want that little stepping stones of the things we're going to do, and breaking these down into small pieces and go, actually, I just need you to start doing this thing differently to what you were doing before. Something that people can slip into their day-to-day routines, not something where we have to completely overwhelm them in the amount of information they have to take on board. But just tell me something I need to do, and I'll do that. I'll give you an example. We've been shifting in our company to Teams and away from Zoom all year, and it is painful beyond belief. It's a massive change. And if I ask people in my organization to take on board all the things that we're doing, why would I waste their brain power with all of those thoughts? I can make them very tired very quickly. But I'm just pulling out things. And we came out with a rule yesterday, which was when we're hosting courses using Teams, which I do all the time. I've got the Neuroscience for Change course next week, and I've got 4 weeks of courses coming up, because I've got the Change Practitioner the week after, the Agile Change Agent on the third week, around the 18th of November. And then the following week, just before my birthday, I've got the Agile Change Coach course coming up. And you all join those courses, these virtual classroom courses. And just a little rule now is you come up as an external because you don't have an email address that's on my company, but we immediately go in there and on the 3 dots next to your name, and we make you an attendee. It's a stupid little thing, but it just means that a lot of the functionality for Teams now works. So there is something there about what we are constantly doing is we are breaking things down to a tiny little habit, a little routine we want you to adopt that will improve the value of what we're getting out of Teams almost immediately. But it's not so overpowering that you think, oh, I can't remember all the things I'm supposed to be doing. So there is a skill. Decomposition is being able to break a behavior change down into what are all the small little things, the little habits, little things that we need to do to actually overcome change fatigue. So I think that is one of the most important things. The other thing I would say is the irony of, in an agile change world, we are part of the problem. If I hands up, because when I am working in an agile change way, you can see the iterative plan up on the screen at the moment. Often I work over a year with an organization. We look at the shift we need to make. I'm working on a major cultural change, which is actually bringing in agility to a large manufacturing company at the moment. And it's probably going to take us 3 to 5 years to actually really shift all the things that they're doing. But we take it 1 year at a time. And taking that year and actually saying, right, okay, these are the things we want to do. What you find is that we've got 5 iterations, somewhere between 8 to 14 weeks for each of them. Yeah. And so effectively, I've got a change that I'm trying to make happen across the organization, but actually I've got 5 waves of change. So an agile approach does add to the volume of change, but the way in which we can be very specific about what that change is and keep that change relatively small, yeah, and focused actually does help. It does really help exactly in what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. There's a question in there. I can just see one on the impact of AI on a change management approach, and looking at, again, the CEO surveys and the number of CEOs that are planning to bring in generative AI into their businesses. And I actually use AI a lot in the work that I do, because I run the Changeability Pro platform where an awful lot of this content is housed, and that is all driven by AI. So we work algorithmically. We're always labeling things and helping you find it through AI searches. So we do an awful lot of that. And I think the thing that I notice the most about the AI change work that I do is that it triggers a huge amount of behavior change. Because actually what you're doing is you're shifting people from originating their own work to almost critiquing the work that AI can do for you. Literally before this call, I was getting really stuck. I was writing a whole series of communications, and I actually put it into my Changeability Pro platform, and it came back with a whole series of suggested content. And I thought, oh yeah, why did I start with a blank piece of paper? Why didn't I just start here first? But it changes my job from being sort of starting with origination to actually being willing to critique and edit. So I become much more of a prompt engineer, do I know the questions to ask, and an editor rather than an originator. And I think that's a major sort of shift, cultural shift for people. Rudy's asked about Agile Change Managers. No, I don't think you're going to see a job title called Agile Change Manager, to be honest, Rudy. But what you are going to see in interviews is there is an expectation that you have an ability to think and plan and manage an Agile initiative. And when I use the word initiative, because it's that combination, it really is an agile change, because it's that combination of, can you work with your developers who are working in a very agile way? So do you understand the concepts, the principles of agile that enable you to do that? And can you deliver a shift in behavior and an achievement of outcomes, so the organization can do something it couldn't do before? And can you do that in an iterative, incremental way? And that really is the essence of what the Agile Change Agent course is all about, because I pulled that course together so that ultimately you would have a package of materials that enable you to take any change and go, do you know what? I can work this out in an agile way. I know all of the techniques. I know how to create this agile change roadmap and why important this is. Yeah. I can't see. I don't know if there's any more questions in the chat. Anybody got anything that they want? Sorry, somebody Keith said, and any observations on how an agile project operates within a non-agile hierarchical organization? Yes, George. I'm working in Germany at the moment with an organization where the biggest pushback on agile is from senior leaders, because they are sticking to their sort of hierarchy of everything has to go through them, and they are looking for an end-to-end plan, because they find that is very reassuring. You know, it's all planned out, everything for the whole year, and I'm going, I can do that for you. Just be clear though, the further out I plan, and I have just pulled together a whole series of stepping stones from now until October of next year. Yeah? But I'm saying to them, can I just be clear to you? I can put all this together for you, but it is subject to change. So I can give you the high level. And so if we do change any of those high level ones, I won't have wasted all the planning time. Or I can give you all the detailed planning for each of those steps, and we would have wasted that detailed planning time. Because I can tell you now that I feel very confident that I know what the activities are running up through October, November, December, January. After that, it starts to get a little hazy for me. I know what we have to achieve, but exactly how I'm going to do it is very much dependent on what we get delivered by Christmas. So it's having that ability to talk to senior leaders and go, I can give you a detailed plan and we can do it in a waterfall way, but the disadvantages for you are. And in fact, one of the things we do in the Agile Change Agent course is we actually play through those scenarios. And I give a lot of coaching support to you, because I know how important it is for you to walk away with your own arguments for this. So we do quite a lot of work on that on the first day so that you can pull this together. Yeah. Somebody's asked about ProSci and Agile. I have actually written a paper that shows you how Agile Change complements the ProSci method. So I will make sure, Mark, that I get that link to you so you can send that out in the email for everybody else. What I'm gonna do is carry on for a bit, because I've seen a question about strategy and implementation and all sorts of things. So I'm going to carry on, and then hopefully I'm answering the questions, and then we'll do, and in about 10 minutes, I'll do another little bit and see what happens. But certainly somebody's asked about Prince and Agile at the same time. Yes. In the course, I talk about how we can do the behavioural change piece in a very agile and iterative way, even if the delivery of what you're getting is being run along waterfall lines. In other words, you are getting one delivery at the end. So I do an awful lot of that in the course as well. One of the things that so if I go back to what I was talking about here, so I started with cutting through all of the agile principles that are in every methodology. And I just thought, do you know what? There's a lot in here about collaboration, decision-making, empowerment. There's a lot about enabling people to be intrinsically motivated. There's a lot in here about delivering on time, but keeping all of the requirements open, being driven by benefits, being and prioritization. And I basically just cut across that and went, do you know what? We need to focus on the business need, which gives us our reasons. On-time delivery, which if we don't deliver on time affects business need. Iterative approach, we can come back to things. If we don't get everything done, we can always bounce back to it later because we're working iteratively. And that leads us to an evolving rather than a fully planned solution. And I put collaboration sits behind each of those as the fifth principle. And that, and in the course, I show how that leads us to this Agile Change roadmap, which basically chunks up your overall vision into outcomes for the iteration. And an outcome is probably going to be 4, 5, 6 sprints. So we can then further decompose that outcome into specifics for every couple of weeks during the iteration. And then, of course, for each of those sprints, we're going to decompose that outcome into specific things that we're going to do. So you start to see how the breakdown mindset is, it's one of the key skills that I teach on this course, but also that I make sure that you are able to coach others to do, because it's easy to explain, but it's sometimes harder to do. And what I put in this course was I gave you some structure around some of the documentation that you might need to pull together, like a description of the change, making order out of chaos by saying what is the scope and what's not in scope, the business case, because we need the benefits for prioritization and motivation, a strategy for your change strategy. How are you going to work with, if it's a waterfall approach or if it's an agile approach, from your product owners or your project management? How are you going to apply behavioural change to making sure that people adopt new ways of working? So your strategy is all that thinking you do up ahead and some comms planning as well. Anybody familiar with Prince 2 or managing successful programs or Agile PM? Agile PM has feasibility and foundations. Managing successful programs has identifying a program and defining a program. Prince 2 had starting up and initiating a project. There's always a starting point. And in iteration 1 in the Agile Change handbook, I wrote about how you would want to make an initial start on documenting what the change is before then chunking it up into iterations. Of course, you'll review all that at the end of every iteration because we're flexible, but you do need to have a bit of organization at the start. And then I talk about techniques that are in this course. I mean, I've talked about decomposition a lot. Decomposition leads you on to prioritization. Prioritization leads you on to benefits identification. And then there's also a lot on your personal leadership style, because all of the things that we do in the roadmap rely on collaboration. And so how do you set yourselves up, not as a leader, as in a hierarchical, you will be followed, but followship? How do you set yourselves up so actually you are a powerful magnetic force and people want to follow your lead through this roadmap? Because you need to be that powerful force. You are a credible force, that people feel that you've got it all under control, that you're organized, you know what you're doing. They will follow your lead, and they have to, because actually the roadmap is wave after wave of change. So there's a lot on your own personal leadership and abilities and how we set you up for success, as much as there is about the structural planning and other techniques. And following on, when I was writing the Agile Change Coach course, is of course the concept lead to the roadmap. So the roadmap is core. So we're working off the basis of this iterative incremental plan. And what I put in there, synthesized from so many change management lifecycle models, from William Bridges and Kurt Lewin and John Cotter, and all of those fantastic pieces of thinking. But I developed something that is really, it's behavioral change for multiple simultaneous change. And that's why you'll see resilience in this life cycle model, because I need you to be aware and interested in the change, to think, oh yeah, really, we need to change. Feel positive about it, get excited and motivated by the benefits, participate in it. In other words, start making changes to how you work, and then bed those down and really realize the benefits personally and for the organization. But when you're starting to feel positive, you can get knocked off course. Somebody can say something and then immediately you can start to feel a bit more cynical. Or you can be participating and making the change happen and it goes wrong and you sort of lose your enthusiasm. So resilience is that sort of trampoline. So you sort of bounce onto it and bounce back up. And so there are lots of techniques. And I said to Mark when I did this webinar in Australia this morning, that for years I've been saying there are 41 techniques in the Agile Change Coach course. I'm wrong, there's 43. I'd never counted them like this before, so I put this together. I counted it so many times yesterday because I couldn't believe I'd been wrong for so long. But these are all practical techniques, and they are all based on neuroscience, emotional intelligence, positive psychology. They are things, I won't bore you with all the academic references, but I can always talk about them. But they are ways of looking at how the brain works and using how the brain wants to work to do something. So, for example, we might get, we're thinking about the dilution effect in the brain. So we think about how we curate a message so that actually we're stripping it out to these are the things you want the brain to focus on and do. So there's lots of techniques in this course that are all about actually working smarter at the end of the day. And they all draw back to a key thing, which is we are here to create the internal motivation, the intrinsic motivation of those who have to change their ways of working. That's what we do. Yeah. I'm just going to get on to being really smart and why it's so smart. I just think I can't make the slides any bigger. I've got a full screen on them, so I'm hoping that that works, but you will be getting these afterwards as well. If there's any more questions, fire them in the chat, because I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes talking about how brain smart an agile change approach is. So put anything you want to ask me in the chat, and then I will come back to those before we wrap up. This is something I really celebrate, actually, because it's just really interesting when you understand the basics of how the brain operates, that you go back and look at why does Agile work so well? Why do the ideas, why is this a really helpful way to make change happen? And we start to look at how the brain works. And one of the things it's very keen on doing is minimizing effort. Our brains like to save power because our brains are about 3% of our body weight. They use 20% of our processing power. So our brains are very power hungry, and our brains like to save energy wherever they can. So things that we get in the roadmap, we work in short cycles. So our brains don't have to process information, for example, for the whole year. No, I've got people working at the moment who are processing information about what needs to happen next week and what needs to happen by the end of December or by the time they go off on Christmas holidays. And that's it, because we're trying to minimize the processing power. The roadmap is very visual. Actually, it's the second lowest energy requirement in the brain. If you want to see how the brain works, smell it requires the least energy. But what you're doing right now, listening to me and synthesizing all the information I'm giving you, requires the most energy. Just after smell, we have visuals. A picture paints 1,000 words because the brain assimilates information from pictures incredibly quickly. And also by working in these small ways, so if I just put it up there, you'll see outcome after outcome, short iterations. What the brain's got is these stepping stones. And it means, as far as the brain's concerned, there are fewer scenarios it has to run, because it goes, oh, that's going to happen, then that happens. And it doesn't have to keep going, oh, what will happen now? Because the brain uses a lot of energy when it has to run a lot of scenarios. Also, what you'll see there is frequent achievements, which creates dopamine in the brain, the energy, the motivation that we get from doing things, and also aligning expectations to reality. The brain uses a lot of energy when it suddenly realizes that what it thought would happen, it's back to certainty, what it thought would happen hasn't happened. So it thought it was going to go along that, we've gone off at a tangent. So when you work in smaller, more focused amounts of time, I can say with more certainty, can't I? These are the things that are going to happen next week. I feel a lot more certain about that. And I can go into a lot more detail and provide more reassurance when I'm talking about that than I'm talking about, well, this is what's going to happen in January. So we're saving energy in the brain. Prioritization, the brain wants commonality. It wants to create common goals and objectives with other people because we are social creatures. And being social creatures, we like to work together. We create oxytocin in the brain, which is that bonding chemical. It's when we feel, connected to other people. It enables us to align expectations and reality and promote curiosity because we are debating things and we're having social interactions and collaborating with people. So the prioritization criteria that we work on in Agile Change that drives that iterative approach, really brain friendly. Of course, we're working on collaboration. So again, we are meeting the needs of the brain in terms of that oxytocin, that bonding chemical. When we are going to treat each other with more respect, it is a more positive working environment when we feel connected to each other. And there's lots of studies that I can bore you with about that. And then lastly, we think about outcome after outcome at the end of iterations or at the end of sprints within iterations, which gives us plenty of opportunity to celebrate. And in fact, you get 2 hits from celebrating because we anticipate the celebration and then we have the pleasure of the celebration. So that creates a culture of positivity and we feel valued and respected. So wrapped into this, we think about rewards and celebrations. So effectively, what I'm saying is that Agile Change isn't just, oh, that's quite useful. It's an incredibly brain smart way of working. So I've had 45 minutes. So I'm just trying to work out any more questions. Anybody? There's a lady called Melissa who had her hand up, but she hasn't put anything in the chat yet. Any other questions? Any other thoughts that people want to share? Very happy to take on board. Is Agile Change making sense? Thumbs up if you think I've made sense today, if you think it's been useful. Hopefully it's inspired you. Yeah, the more you know, the better, effectively. This is, people don't always say they're working in an Agile Change way. This is back to Rudy's question about job descriptions and job titles. But I promise you, the underlying assumption is you understand this stuff. And that's what I find really interesting is that I was on a call with a whole load of people from the business who are being impacted by change. They're not agilists, they're not change professionals, And when I said to them, I'd really like to talk about working an incremental plan and talking about the backlog, and I said, oh, do you know what those things mean? Never seen. They're always, oh yeah, that's all fine. There is an understanding about a lot of agile terminology, but there's also an understanding that you come on to a change, that you will know how to construct that change so that it delivers incrementally. I've got ops directors all over the world who are expecting that, even though when I question them, they say, well, I don't say that explicitly, but I say, you're expecting me to deliver incrementally, aren't you? Yeah, because I don't want you overwhelming my teams, because if you're overwhelming them with change, then they can't get on with their business as usual job. So there's an underlying implicit assumption I'm going to work in an agile way, and there's an underlying implicit assumption that you know this stuff. And I think that's the thing to take away from this webinar. Thank you for the people who just said you've ordered the book. You get the book free, by the way, when you go on the course. So don't forget that. And this is some feedback. And what I love about this feedback is about people saying how they have applied what they're doing. So somebody who's really struggling with their manager have applied some of the prioritization ideas that I gave them in the course. And they are now having a far better working relationship, because this woman's manager, he was one of those people that says, oh, I want you to do this now, and this, as if he'd forgotten what he'd asked her to do last week, and her workload was becoming overwhelming. And so you can get the book on Amazon, on Kogan Page, the publishers as well. If you've Jane's just completed the change management course, you can come back to me on agilechangemanagement.co.uk and I'll get you sorted on Agile Change as well. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. So Mark, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Just point to one question that's in the Q&A bit, not in the chat, so I'm not sure if you saw that one. So Mark asks, what is your opinion that agile and delivery focused work tends to be done under the banner of work streams, MVPs, which I confess I'm not sure what that stands for, and initiatives, as opposed to traditional projects or programs?
I personally don't think terminology matters. It's what you do with it at the end of the day. And I must admit, when I wrote the Agile Change Handbook, I lifted it above all of the different terminology and thought I need to teach people how to think about any piece of work in a very agile way, how to apply the core concepts of agile so that you can work in that way. So whether it's work streams, whether you call them projects, products, work streams, doesn't matter. You can apply an iterative approach to how you shift the capability of your organization. Yeah. That's what I would say is the most important thing. Whatever you, and just call things what you need to call them. But it's very difficult to sort of understand what's going on in, because no one organization applies agile in the same way. To avoid looking stupid, that's why I put the concepts together and made sure that you have all of this sort of content here, so that you really have your own agile toolkit, if you like, and understanding, so that you can flex to whatever agile environment you end up working in. And going back to Rudy's point about job hunting, of course, this gives you a fantastic story to tell when you're sitting in interviews. I think that's the other piece, because I make sure that you have got a sort of a way of describing how you make change happen based on this agile approach. Yes, Natalie, I do assess companies and their ability to change. That's what I was on the phone with this HR director yesterday, and talking about how listening to everything she was saying and what's needed in her organisation, and just going back and reflecting to her that actually what she's talking about there is actually quite a shift in culture and priorities for her organisation. And it isn't just a shift, for example, in the processes that they follow. And we had a very good conversation about how I opened it up to be much wider than what she thought was, this is just going to be another methodology. So yeah, I think it's always an interesting conversation to have. I hope you really like that webinar. I'm sorry I've got such a stinking cold and I'm coughing all over the place, but hopefully it was still useful. And I really, really look forward to welcoming you on the courses, because at the end of the day, I said it in the last webinar, I'm going to say it again. Nobody can take away a qualification from you once you've got one. It makes you more interesting. It makes you more current. And whenever you're hiring somebody, and I'm speaking now as a CEO, and you've got two great candidates in front of you, it is always easier to hire the candidate with the most qualifications, because what it's screaming is that that person has invested in themselves, that person's kept themselves up to date, and therefore you become the lower risk candidate, because somebody else might be just as great, but they're not quite as up to date. They haven't got the qualifications. So if it all goes wrong, you can point to HR and say, but I hired somebody with all the qualifications. So you become the least risk candidate, if you like. Any other questions? Anything else I should be aware of before I disappear
I,
off? I think we've gone over time, but it's okay.
yeah, and I think you've covered most that I could see in the chat and Q&A. So I think we can wrap up there. And you've done a great
Yeah.
job hiding the cold, by the way, Melanie.
Thank you. I feel like death warmed up, if I'm honest. And I was thinking about cancelling that this week, but I've never done that to you, Mark, in 20 years. And I thought, no. So I'm going to carry on with all my throat sweets and everything. So thank you so much. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to follow up on the conversation. I'm always here. I love my job. I love helping you develop your career. So that's what I'm here to do. See you
Brilliant
soon.
stuff. Thanks, Mel. And just a reminder that I'll be sending up a follow-up email once we've got the recording online, available on demand.
Oh, I've got to find that ProSci document for you now, haven't I?
Yes,
Let me go and
yeah,
find that. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. I'll put that link in. So do look out for that. And just to wrap up, just a really big thank you for joining us today. I know we're all very busy, so the fact you've taken best part of an hour to join us, we really appreciate that. And we just hope we've made it worth your while. I'm sure we have seen some great feedback in the comments. So great job, Mel. Thanks everyone for attending. Enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend ahead.
Thank you. See ya.
See ya.
Right. ProSci. It was ProSci, Agile and ProSci, wasn't it? Yeah.